chilly South Africa. As you can see here, I've got the fire going and I'm sort of out in the patio area. There's the pool, and we're going to be talking about the Derek Chauvin verdict, right? Specifically, what sentence should Derek Chauvin get? So for those of you who followed the trial and have sort of been reading up about it, why don't you leave a comment? You can either, I guess, leave it in the live or leave it in the comment section. What do you think is the appropriate sentence? Hi, Nicole. What do you guys think is the appropriate sentence for Derek Chauvin? I've been thinking about it. I've been doing quite a bit of reading, but I'd be interested to see what you guys think. So if we just go back in time a little bit and we look at when this happened, it started and ended, I guess, May the 25th, 2020. And it's not even May now, and the trial's already basically been decided. That is a really quick turnaround for a court case and that whole scenario. And probably the authorities wanted to get it behind them, because the longer it was sort of in limbo and in legal limbo and in process, the longer there would be sort of tension going on, right? Second-degree murder, it needs to set a precedent. Connie says, I was surprised by the second-degree murder. I was also surprised by that. I also saw that Chris Cuomo, who's a lawyer by education and experience, he said he was also surprised. So we're gonna talk about that. One thing that I found quite interesting was someone actually asked the question, why is there even a trial? There's a 9-minute video. Why is there even a trial? Hello from Minnesota. It'd be interesting to hear what you guys in Minnesota think of all this. So I've kind of I've just prepared a little bit of, not really a statement, but just a response, I guess a reaction. And I'm going to try and go through it as well as keeping an eye on what you guys are saying. So Paula says, how is Minnesota today? It would be interesting to know what it feels like on the ground there. Crystalina Bacteria, hello from the UK. Prince Charming's mom. Most of us are thrilled with all 3 counts. Peaceful, okay. So the sentence that it looks like they can choose between is a minimum of 12 and a half years and a maximum of 40 years. I suppose if they can argue mitigation, you might be able to deviate to a lesser sentence, and not quite sure if you could get more than 40 years. I suppose it's possible, but somewhere between 12 and a half and 40 years, what do you think is the appropriate sentence in this case? So what I find a little bit interesting, just stepping back a little bit, is True Crime Rocket Science is a true crime channel. To be honest, I'm personally not that interested in, I'm curious about the George Floyd case, but I'm not that interested in talking about it, just because it's so divisive. And when so many people are polarized, it's very easy to alienate easily half of your audience. And I don't want to do that, but this is also a true crime channel. And when it is something that is not only getting the attention of the true crime community, which I think it has been, but also national and international attention, I think you're crazy if you don't deal with it. I mean, you've got to take a position as a true crime channel. Wow, the smoke's not quite going up where it's supposed to. Maybe it will in a moment. Zeta says, I would like him to stay in prison for a solid 25 years without parole. Okay. So I do think if you're a respectable true crime channel, you need to be talking about the thing that America and many other countries, many other nations are talking about. I'm not saying it's easy, but I do think it's important to be aware of the legal process and the sensitivities of different people. And I'm in Plettenberg Bay in South Africa. I'm outside, just put the fire on, and it is a little bit chilly. I actually swam this afternoon in water that was 16 degrees Celsius. I'm actually still kind of cold, trying to warm up. Crystalina Bacteria says Derek Chauvin looked shocked. His eyes kept going side to side. Yes, I noticed his eyes sort of going that way, and then sometimes he would look straight at the camera. And I was trying to screen grab him looking straight at the camera, and he did it a couple of times. But I mean, think about it. In that moment when the verdict was read, his whole life effectively, technically changes, because it basically means this is the moment his freedom is officially deprived, and it basically means the beginning of kind of the end of his life. He might be in prison for 10 years, 20 years, decades over something stupid, something that he will probably regret for the rest of his life. Someone said he looked shocked because he's like, how can that be? I'm a cop. I think there's another reason that he may have been surprised, and that is something I'll get to in a moment when we deal with the media. I think in the New York Times described the verdict as, quote, a rare rebuke of police violence. So there have been quite a few cases that I think a lot of you know. There have been quite a few police, I'm not quite sure how you call what one could call it, police shootings or police arrests cases that have not been prosecuted and that people have been upset with. And so this is a change in that sense, right? So so first of all, I think it's important that we talk about it. The second thing is, someone said Derek Chauvin is on trial, not George Floyd and not America. And I just want to respond to that. First of all, that's true. Derek Chauvin is on trial, or was on trial. The sentencing is happening, I think, in 2 months from now. But anyway, he was on trial. But to say that George Floyd wasn't on trial, in terms of the defense, he certainly was. The defense, so Chauvin's lawyer would have wanted to make the case that George Floyd is on trial. What substances was he on? How big was he? Was he intimidating? Was he cooperating? What happened during a prior arrest? Although I think they weren't really allowed to talk about that. So in terms of the defense, they certainly would want to put George Floyd on trial. You kind of follow me on that. And then to say, someone also said, America's not on trial, Derek Chauvin is on trial. And I get that sentiment, but symbolically, Minneapolis and Minnesota were kind of on trial. I don't mean that the state was on trial or that the city was on trial, but symbolically, there was a sense that the police were on trial in general, in a general sense, that this was symbolic of a broader malaise, and that also racism was on trial. Now, whether that's accurate or not is a different story. So I think you've got to draw the line between saying, did it resonate with people and was it symbolic? And is it accurate for it to be a racist issue or whatever, right? So we're going to talk about that. one thing I think is also another open question is, have things gotten worse or better because of the trial, because of the verdict? And I must say, my sort of reaction to the verdict was kind of relief. It was sort of surprise and relief. Connie says most cop killings are justified. However, this was 100% not. I see where you're coming from, but I don't know if one can generalize saying most cop killings are justified. I think, especially in this climate, you've got to be careful saying anything like that. I think you've got to look at it on a case-by-case basis. Also, you've got to look at which country you're talking about. One thing that I think is quite interesting is I'm from South Africa, and you have a totally inverse situation almost to America here. And so how does that look? How does that feel, right? So what do you guys think? Have things gotten better or worse since the advent of the trial and sort of also the verdict? And do you think things are going to get better? What do you guys think about that? I must say, I'm not, like, I think if Chauvin was acquitted, I think things would have rapidly deteriorated. But over the long sort of arc, I don't know whether one can say things are getting better. Someone says much better and they will get better. Cops need to be accountable. So I think where I differ is I see a trend through society, not just in America, but around the world. And I think it's driven by social media to some extent. It's driven by populism. And there's a distrust of the police all over the world. And, is that good for society? What do you think? Kiki says they won't get better. Mainstream media just is not showing the riots. A lot of people really despise the mainstream media, like the mainstream media is the problem, which I find interesting. There are so many media permutations that are trying to control the narrative that the mainstream media seems to be sort of demonized. CRH squad, there must be deep reform. Okay. Cops need better training. Okay, so I just want to go into the area of context now, right? So if you think about what I think we've got to acknowledge just in a general sense, this is kind of going into the psychology of everything, is we're at a time of heightened anxiety as a global community. This is due to coronavirus. It's also due to things that are going on driven by social media, such as Black Lives Matter. But there's also other things that are going on, populism, tribalism, all of that kind of stuff. And that just drives anxiety. Are you part of this group or part of that group? It's no longer that you are a community. It's a dualistic scenario, us versus them. It's no longer a sense of community. It's being part of a group, which means a part of the total society, right? Someone says, I live in Minnesota. Sorry, your comments just disappeared. Wanted to read that. Sorry about that. I didn't mean they are the problem. There was never any doubt Chauvin was going to be found guilty. I must say, I thought there was a possibility that he would be found not guilty. There are some legal scenarios where if there's just a little bit of doubt, then you say, well, you can't be 100% sure. And in this case, there was a little bit of doubt. George Floyd being on fentanyl, having coronavirus, I thought that was going to be quite a significant thing. So I was definitely a bit surprised. I thought he was going to be found guilty of third-degree murder. So it wasn't that different from what I suspected, but I was still quite surprised. Maureen Gunn says it remains to be seen what real long-term effects the guilty verdict's going to have. I mean, part of that is Chauvin could appeal and win it. So it's not like the legal journey is over. It is still happening. So so we'll see. We'll see what happens at the end of the day. So I just want to go back into context. We're living in a state of anxiety in the world, and in a way, the George Floyd incident, the Derek Chauvin trial, has captured a moment of that anxiety, a sense of distrusting the authorities, a sense of protest, a sense of, and I mean, just think about the sort of the mantra of this case, I can't breathe. It's also the kind of the mantra of coronavirus, right? But overall, we're living in a state of tension in the world. And I do think that, could Chauvin appeal on the basis of trial by media, saying, the jury weren't free to make up their minds. If they'd, I'm not saying everyone in the jury, some people in the jury, if they wanted to vote a certain way, would they not have been victimized themselves? So in that scenario, is this justice? So I think there could be a possible grounds for appeal based on trial by media, that the media coverage has infected the trial narrative, if we can put it that way. I do think it's really interesting that a video taken by a teenager basically formed a central part of the trial narrative, right? And I think that's going to happen more and more in 21st century hearings, is that social media, something taken on someone's phone, recordings, because if you think about it, there are phones everywhere. So no matter where you go, to a store or wherever, there are phones everywhere. People have them on their dash cams. They're on buildings, but they're basically everywhere. And so anywhere where there's an incident, it's very likely that it is going to be recorded. And I can't quite remember who said it, but someone said, I don't understand why there's a trial. There were 9 minutes of video. And I think that's both true and not true. I think the 9 minutes of video basically did provide the case in a nutshell, right? But I think the other side of it is, I certainly was looking at that with my legal background and kind of going, this isn't right, but what does it mean? I mean, I looked at it and said, okay, I don't think it's murder, but it's something else. What is it? So I think even though the video shows a problem, the other side of it is, legally, what does this mean? Legally, what are the kind of precepts that you've got to stick to, right? And I'm going to get to it in a moment, but let me just touch on it quickly. Thank you, Heather. When we talk about intent, so if you're saying it was second-degree murder or murder at all, then you say for there to be murder, there's got to be intent, right? Well, for intent, there's usually got to be a motive. So what was Chauvin's motive? If he intentionally killed George Floyd, what was his motive? And I don't think the motive was racism. I don't think the motive was ever, I don't like black people, so I'm going to murder him. I don't think that was ever on the cards. So what was his motive? And so if you go away from a murder motive, right, you go away from his intent wasn't to murder, and you say something like, his intent was, and it may be something else, his intent was control, which I think it was. His intent was to subdue, which I think it was. His intent was to perhaps intimidate, which I think it was. Then you can kind of say, what was the larger context around that? And I think there was a lot. There is a sense of, it's almost the sense I get in America is that you shoot first and ask questions later from both sides. In other words, if you hesitate, you lost. If you hesitate, so you've got to almost, excessive force is almost required if you want to come out of a altercation alive. I mean, that's a separate discussion in a way. But in terms of the context, can one say the jury were coerced here? So what I mean is, so you're the jury on this trial. Now, just imagine that. Imagine you, the jury, in a very, very high-profile trial that is being broadcast around the world. And it just means that everybody's watching, and there are going to be serious consequences to what you decide. And I think there's a difference between a lower profile trial where if you decide something, there are not going to be riots, and another kind of trial where if you decide something, there are going to be riots. So I think you can ask the question. I don't say it was direct. I'm just saying it was possibly implicit, a sense that the jury may have felt coerced, right? What do you guys think? Do you think that that's a factor at all? Someone says the other two people that were in the vehicle with Floyd were uninjured. So what gives? I think the other thing to mention is this isn't over. There are also 3 other officers that have to be, is it 3? Is it 2 or 3? I think it's 3 other officers that need to be, go to trial. And I think what one commentator said is it's very unlikely to happen. Based on what's happened to Derek Chauvin, you can probably expect that these other officers will jump at the chance of taking a plea deal. Someone said this, and I wish I could mention the guy who said it. I just can't remember his name. But he said 97% of criminal cases don't go to trial. That's a hell of a high number. And if you're upset about the John Benet Ramsey case not going to trial, it almost feels, well, isn't it normal? Isn't it normal that cases don't really go to trial? So I don't think we're going to see these other guys going to trial. And I think, in a way, the defense have found out that this was really the worst case scenario for them. They didn't really win anything. We'll know when the sentencing happens whether there's any sympathy for Derek Chauvin, but the fact that he's decided to allow the judge to decide his sentence, not the jury, I think shows that they have decided, okay, this is the worst case scenario for them. If anything, they're going to get perhaps a tiny bit of leniency from the judge, right? CR8, the number must go down. That's the whole point. Yeah. I don't know. I think the one side of getting that number down is prosecutions like this, verdicts like this. But I think the other side is sentiment needs to change. But also, I think sentiment needs to change. But, I wrote this down. I think at the moment there's a kind of mutual intolerance. Do you guys agree with that? There's a kind of mutual intolerance, and we need to get back to a place of mutual tolerance. Now, when I use those words, I use them purposefully. So, a lot of the debate is there racism? And then everyone says, yes, it's racist and racist. I don't know whether you can get away from that. And to use a really stupid example, can you stop dogs from chasing cats? Can you stop cats from lashing out at dogs? There's certain things that I think are innate, and I know human beings aren't animals, but um, I think people are biased in a certain way, and I think certain people. Let me give you a good example. So if you a black person in America, you might have a sense that you're being targeted and there's unfair discrimination, all that kind of thing, right? Let's accept that that's real. But if you come to South Africa, where white people are in the minority, then you have the opposite sense. You have the sense that white people are targeted, and it's not necessarily the case. It's just that there are more of the one person than the other. But what I'm trying to get at is, I think it's natural when there are more of a certain kind of people that things are biased towards them, right? So, and that's why I'm talk about mutual tolerance. Thanks very much. I didn't see who left that, but thanks very much for that. That's why I talk about mutual tolerance. Mutual tolerance basically says we're not the best of pals all the time. We're not going to pretend that everything's great, but we can agree to treat each other better, and that's certainly better than mutual intolerance, where we say, I can't stand you, and I'm going to show that to you, and you can't stand me, and I expect you to demonstrate that. Does that make sense? Throw some more wood on the fire. So how do we get to mutual tolerance? So let's go on to the next page. So in terms of the media narrative, what I thought was quite interesting was the New York Times calling this a rare rebuke of public violence. Of police violence, a rare rebuke of police violence. And what they're basically saying is that there've been a lot of these cases and then nothing happens. And I've certainly watched from a distance, and I mean, I don't have a horse in the race. I'm not in America, and so I'm just looking at what's the situation from here. And there've been a couple of instances where I've looked and thought, wow, I don't understand how that's possible. I remember, I think Scott Reich covered something that happened in Colorado. Can't quite remember where exactly in Colorado, but I think what happened was a guy ran away. The guy was running away, and I think he was shot in the back while he was running away. And when I saw that, I thought, that can't be right. Obviously, you could argue the guy shouldn't have run away, but how's someone running away a threat? So I've certainly seen from a distance a lot of these cases where they do go to trial, and then the police are unanimously acquitted. And so this has been a change, and I've got a feeling. Thanks a lot, Kiki. Thanks a lot. Keep it up. So this is a change, and I think the fact that it's gotten national attention in America and the fact that it's getting international attention means that the penny is starting to drop, right? The penny is starting to drop, and probably police forces internally, and it would be good to speak to someone who's in the police, are having internal discussions saying something new. We're going to treat these situations in a different way. We're going to, I don't know if the word is moderate their response, but certainly make sure that it's appropriate, because it does feel like it's often inappropriate. So what I want to go into now, just briefly, before we go to where to from here. So Gigi says we have many black deaths in custody here in Australia. So yeah, I mean, it's something that's going on all around the world. But I just want to touch on this article from the New York Times, which I've got here on my notebook, which I just think is quite, can you see that? Which I think is quite ironic. And it says, America at crossroads after Chauvin guilty verdict. Now, this person that said America's not on trial. Now, you might say, if this is from CNN, I don't really care what it says, and that's fine if you want to say that. I just do think it's interesting that the headline that they chose is America at crossroads based on this verdict. So some people certainly have the opinion that America was on trial, or some policies have been on trial, the police have been on trial, whatever you want to put it. I think the fact that I'm a South African here talking to you guys about this gives you a sense that this is quite big. This is a singular moment that, in the same way that O.J. Simpson and Rodney King were big moments, this is another big moment. But what is so ironic with this particular article, this page on CNN, is it talks about America's at the crossroads after the guilty verdict. You see cheering people. And then it says, Americans are now waiting to see if Derek Chauvin's conviction will spur reform, right? And then right on the opposite side, thanks, Angel. Good to see you here. You are amazing. Thanks a lot. Appreciate that. Thank you. On the other side of that same article, it says, Ohio police officer shot and killed black teen girl wielding a knife. So when you say, is this going to create change? At the height of this stuff going on, you're still having people shot. So you may have change in legislation, but you're going to have change on the ground of this actual thing. Well, not so far. I mean, you'd think right now it would stop, people being shot. But the other side of it is the media, I think, are somewhat culpable in they want to cover something that is going to get traction, right? And so I don't know if this is technically the same thing. As far as I know with that story, there's a screen grab, and I haven't seen the whole video, but there's a screen grab where a female is about to stab another female, and that female is about to stab is shot. And so I don't know if that's an example of police violence or an example of, was that the right thing to do? I always think, if someone's got a knife or they're unarmed, why can't you shoot them in the leg? Or why does it need to be a fatal shooting? You're just trying to slow them down. So it seems like it's all or nothing. Kill someone. What about just slow them down? What about, that kind of thing? And then in the middle of these two stories, it says India's second COVID wave hits like a tsunami. And so in the middle of all this, you've got coronavirus. And it's almost like, if you think about the fuss that's been made of this particular trial, people have been far more interested in this trial than in coronavirus. Coronavirus is like a distant memory in a way. And there's this triumph with people. I just sort of wonder, whether we're in reality, what reality we choosing to believe in. That's all. Let me just show you the thing again so you can see. It's that one. And then there's another one that was also quite interesting, for me quite ironic, was from the Los Angeles Times. Chauvin guilty, jury convicts former officer of murdering George Floyd. I mean, even those headlines, murder, so that was murder. And as I say, to me, murder is intent. Anyway, it says, unleashing joy, relief, and renewed calls for police reform. That relief, I think, speaks about a sense of coercion. So if we're relieved at this verdict, isn't it, I think on the one hand, it's because justice has been denied. I think it's because things have happened that probably weren't right and definitely weren't right. But I think there's also a sense of relief that what if he was acquitted? Then what? Isn't the relief attached to that? And I'm going to talk about that from kind of a South African context, which I think is going to raise your eyebrows a little bit. Under that, also from the Los Angeles Times, it refers to anxious nation exhales and reflects. And that's exactly what I've been talking about, that America is anxious right now. The world is anxious right now, not just because of Black Lives Matter, but because of lockdowns, because of, am I going to get a virus? Am I going to keep my job? Racist rhetoric. True Crime Channel, thanks very much for that. It's I think quite flattering getting a donation from another True Crime Channel. So it also says that ex-cop could get 40 years. Do you think Derek Chauvin deserves 40 years for what he did? Thanks a lot. Appreciate that. True Crime Channel. Sharon Smith, my brother used to make himself pass out when he didn't want to listen to my dad. Okay. Baked cake. Well, some people might say that the trial result was to keep America, and then your comment disappeared. I think I maybe need to bring it up on YouTube here. Let me just bring up the video here. You can see, if I turn the camera, that it's now dark, completely dark outside, and the fire is now well on its way. Let me just put something else on the fire. Okay, so I kind of, before the verdict, I told my patrons on Patreon that I predicted a third degree charge, and I didn't think it would be guilty on all charges. Someone said, I don't understand how you can have all three charges. How I understand it is, if the severest charge, if you're guilty on the severest charge, so in other words, second degree murder, then it kind of flows that you'll be guilty on all of the rest, right? So in other words, if it's the most extreme charge, the severest charge, you are going to be found guilty on the lesser charges because they fall under that. But it doesn't work in the other direction. So if you found guilty of, say, the lightest charge, which would have been second degree manslaughter, then you're only guilty up to that level, and then those other two charges wouldn't apply, right? So I think that's quite interesting just to differentiate. The LA Times saying anxious nation exhales reflects a quite a clever play on words, but I think at the same time as you say that, we are an anxious nation. And so based on that, I just wonder, to what extent does that not inform the court narrative, that anxiety that is playing out right outside the court? And I want to talk a little bit about South Africa and how you have the same thing happening. You have anxiety, and then also the nation being held to ransom in a way as well. So where to from here? There still has to be a hearing on the aggressors. Yes, I don't think there will be. I think they're going to take a plea deal. I mean, if they've learned anything, that this is the worst case scenario, there's no hope. You're not going to, don't try your luck kind of thing. It's the end of the era of the police doing something and getting the get out of jail card that has been happening in the past. So where to from here? I think if you were Derek Chauvin, if you were him, if you were in his shoes, then what happened here is the worst case scenario. I mean, in terms of the verdict, it's the worst possible outcome for him. And So I've said a judge is going to decide on his sentence, not the jury, because he already knows what the jury think of him. And what is quite interesting is the jury's makeup. The jury is 50% white, and I won't say 50% black because it's black and mixed race. There's basically 50-50. And that's a little bit different to the racial composition of the county, which I think is something closer to 65%. I've got it here somewhere. I think according to the July 2019 U.S. Census data for Hennepin County, the averages are there are 68% white people, 14% black people, 7% Hispanic, 7% Asian, 3% multiracial, 1% Native American. So almost 70% white. And so the racial breakdown of the jury was white 50%, black 33%. So heavily in the kind of, it was heavily weighed in favor of a people of color jury, at least half of it. I think that's quite an interesting thing to think about. I mean, you've got to think, what is the dynamic in that jury if you're a white person? If you're a white person and you're mostly white people, what is your opinion going to be? If you you know what I mean? I think that's also a factor. It would be just interesting to see what that dynamic is playing out. What sort of things are said? If you say something, are you chided? What are the white people saying to one another? What are the people of color saying to one another? What are the people of color saying to the white people? I just think that would actually make quite an interesting crime drama. How I mean, you could imagine a movie, the George Floyd jury, something like that. I think could be quite interesting. So where to from here? As I say, I think it's the worst case scenario. The jury decided guilty on all counts, and they were quite strict, I guess. You know, this was murder. This wasn't something else. It was murder. And somewhere I saw a cartoon where it looks like a syringe with fentanyl on it or in it, and then the syringe is sort of like in the shape of a knee on George Floyd's neck. And the thing that's being communicated there was that the absurdity of the notion that it was the fentanyl killed George Floyd. In other words, like it wasn't a knee, it was a syringe, a heavy syringe, a giant syringe filled with fentanyl that actually killed him. I think quite a clever. I think it was quite a clever cartoon to sort of illustrate that. So I've asked this before. I'm just going to bring it up again. Do you think the jury were free to let Chauvin off the hook? So if someone was on the jury, I don't know, you'd have to talk to them. But if someone sat on the jury and thought, I don't think this is murder, do you think he or she would have felt free to have left Chauvin off the hook? That he had a choice in saying, you know, I don't think he's guilty. What is quite interesting is the jury, I think was it 8 hours that they spoke with one another? It wasn't really that long. Anyway, the other thing that I'm not 100% sure of, because I'm kind of on holiday, I haven't really been watching this case as much as I normally would, but sorry, I've just missed a couple of comments there, but were the names of the jurors made public? So before they expressed the verdict, were their names made public? Because I would imagine if your name is made public, and I know in the John Benet Ramsey case, we know the names of the jurors. But so it says here, the jurors' names would be public at a later date. I seem to remember just seeing a quick slide on the news that showed their names, but I could be wrong. Someone says, I think the jurors had both their brain and hearts invested in the case. No names released yet. But if you do argue that their names will be released later, those people can be targeted. I certainly know in the Durst case, there was a particular jury and, that decided Robert Durst was innocent, and I'm pretty upset about that verdict, and a jury in that case, and it's just kind of a different scenario, isn't it? The white supremacists will go after the jury members. I think there's an argument to be made that anyone who feels in this time of tension that the jury let them down, there would be a sense that they would be on the line. Don't you agree? Can you imagine you're a jury member and how you would feel? I think they must be relieved that they're not being asked to sentence in this case. I think that they are quite relieved. Something that crosses my mind, and I'm just being honest, it is speculative, it is conspiracy theory, but I sometimes wonder in a case like this, I kind of had the same thought with O.J. Simpson. All I'm saying is it's a thought. I'm not saying that it's likely even. I'm just saying that it's a thought that kind of materializes is, did someone receive instructions that this needs to be the verdict because we can't afford it not to be the verdict? Do you know what I mean? Regardless of what people thought and what was demonstrated in court, this needs to be the verdict because if we can't have a situation that the verdict's something else. I don't know. I just wonder whether that's possible. I don't know what you guys think. So now we go to, so in other words, in a way, the trial could be just pageantry, just soothing the public that are already upset, Bye truth, go eat something. Okay, so I think some people are getting upset with other people. Okay, so I want to talk about the sentence. 12.5 years apparently is the minimum in a case like this, and that's not for an officer. So if it was a member of the public that did this, it would be a minimum of 12.5 years to 20 years, and I think with aggravating circumstances, I think it can go up to 40 years. So what do you guys think is the appropriate sentence? I think that's unlikely to suggest. I also think it's unlikely. The thought does come up where, does a governor or the president or someone say, look, we can't actually have things getting any worse. It just makes you wonder. 40 years. 0 years. I think the best way to think about sentence is think about other perpetrators. Like, look at Oscar Pistorius. I think he got 15 years for shooting someone through a door. That's 15 years, right? What did the Arias get? What did Scott Peterson get? What did Chris Watts get? But look at other cases where someone got different sentences and think, is this the same kind of thing? So some people say 0 years, some people say, Connie says 10 years out in 7 or 8. I looked at that and I thought 15 years. That was my own, and bear in mind, I didn't watch the whole trial, but I based the 15 years on the fact that I don't think that Chauvin intended to kill George Floyd. I don't think he was very clever, and I think he could have listened and been more sensitive, but I don't really think that he was thinking, I actually want to kill this guy. I don't see a motive. Nevertheless, he did kill someone, so I think he's responsible for that. So I don't know what you guys think. Bear in mind, the judge has got to make a cool decision, not based on emotions, not based on what the public say. He's got to base it on what he thinks. So what do you guys think? Then I think the judge has asked for a pre-sentencing report, which he wants to know beforehand what counsel feel are aggravating aspects. I think definitely what is aggravating is he had a duty of care. The officer had a duty of care. He's there to protect and to serve. And, although he was trying to take this guy into custody, he over executed, right, to put it mildly. But I think this is my personal opinion, I think at the same time, the thing that's the aggravating factor is also the mitigating factor. And what I mean by that is, this isn't a member of the public that assaulted someone, like just a civilian assaulting someone, and then you had that result. This was someone doing his job, and I'm not saying he was doing it well, but he was in a way forced into that situation, meaning he was faced with a certain set of circumstances. I hate that this sounds like I'm defending him or sympathizing with him, but I just mean, if I think of it, if I put myself in that position, if someone said, okay, you're a policeman, you need to arrest this guy, and George Floyd resisted arrest, I don't know what I would do. I wouldn't put my knee on his neck, but you would struggle to probably subdue this guy, or maybe you wouldn't. But the point is, he was sucked into a situation where he had to act because it was his job, and that's what I mean by mitigation. He was trying, I guess, to do his job, but he's doing it badly. I think I'm explaining this quite badly, but the aggravation is he didn't have a duty of care, but in a way the mitigation is that did he have the choice to say, you know what, I don't want to be in this situation, I don't know what to do in this situation, I'm calling it quits, I'm tapping out, I'm just going to leave the situation. Do you see what I mean? To say, well, you know what, this is weird, I'm just going to go home, I don't really know what to do. Do you know what I'm saying? Okay, so the fact that Floyd wasn't cooperating, I think, is something that is going to possibly be argued in mitigation. How far that's going to go, I don't know. So the sentencing is going to be in 2 months' time. So that'll basically take us to just over a year in terms of since this all happened. And then, as I said, the court will decide, the judge will decide what's the appropriate sentence. Now, I'm not 100% sure about this. Will Chauvin testify in his own defense in terms of saying what was mitigation? I actually just don't know. I don't know whether he will speak on his own behalf. I really just don't know. I would imagine the fact that he hasn't said anything hasn't helped him, since what has happened is the worst case scenario. Do you think it would have made a difference if Chauvin did testify and said something along the lines of, I was scared. I don't know what he could have said, but I'm I haven't really thought about it. What could he have said that could have changed stuff? I think something that may be a fact is if it said, I I'd seen George Floyd in the past beat someone up, beat someone to a pulp, or he'd pushed me around before, something like that. I don't know, but something that could change things if he said it. That I was really, I was beaten up at school, and I don't know what, but who knows? Maybe that would be a factor. I just wonder. You know, I think you've always got to ask in a situation like this. Certainly, the defense are asking themselves, shouldn't Chauvin have been put on the stand? At least things could have been better. On the other hand, who knows? Maybe they could have been worse. So, I think it was Scott Reich who said it's quite amazing the speed of this trial versus the Laurie Vallow case. We're already less than a year later, and it's basically resolved. So it just shows you what can happen when there's the will to do something. Now, I want to give you a little bit of South African context. I don't really want to talk in too much detail about it. I think it's, again, very divisive, but I wonder if I want to talk about this. It just feels to me in South Africa like crime is in control, not the law. That's what it feels like in South Africa. And you feel that in particular on the roads. I'm kind of in the middle of a trip, and I've been on like a road trip, and I've driven in Australia, and I've driven in the UK to some extent, and I've don't think I drove in South Korea, but I was driven through South Korea. But certainly in South Africa, it feels like the wild, wild west. So it feels like crime is in control, or that the law isn't in control in South Africa. And so you can argue that there's too much control in certain countries. But for me in South Africa, it feels like there's too little control. Not just on the roads, but in a more general sense. And I think the law is quite interesting if you think about it. So the law is supposed to serve society, but the law is quite interesting if you think about what is appropriate. So let me give an example. I've been reading this book by Dan Lieberman, right? It's really about exercise, but it's also about the science of exercise. And one thing he talks about the legal requirement of seatbelts, right? That wearing a seatbelt is a legal requirement. Now, he was saying that, I'm not sure if it was his grandfather or someone's father, just wouldn't wear a seatbelt because it was taking away his civil liberties. So there was a time where wearing a seatbelt wasn't the law, and then it became the law, and then he didn't want to do it. Whereas youngsters today wear it and there's not a problem. And so I think that's quite an interesting thing. Is wearing a seatbelt taking away your civil liberties, or is it good, right? Now you compare that to him saying, should exercise be mandated? Should there be a law that if you that you should exercise half an hour every day? Meaning, exercise makes you healthier. The science proves that I think if you exercise 30 minutes a day, you can extend your lifespan definitely, etc., etc., etc. So why isn't it legally enforced if it's for your own good? If it's healthy? And you compare that to a seatbelt. I mean, isn't a seatbelt doing the same thing? And the argument then becomes we should have certain freedoms even to do things that aren't good for us. We should have certain freedoms to kind of be bad, but we should be allowed to be sedentary. We should be allowed to make certain choices. And I think when you think about that, and you take it into coronavirus and you take it into all sorts of other things, the law becomes quite a tricky thing, because some people would say, I don't mind if exercise was mandated, made legal. And other people would say, I mind very much. I want to be a couch potato. And someone else might say, yeah, I don't think we should be forced to wear seatbelts. And other people would say, I do. And so what do you make of this different approach to the law? And you take that into a scenario of, I've seen it so many times now. You have the police approaching someone who's apparently done something wrong, but actually hasn't. And they have the approach. And then you have the person who's being approached, resenting it and basically not cooperating because they are interpreting the law. You know what I'm saying? I can't remember his name. I think it was something like Karen Nazar, I don't know, but it was this guy in an army uniform who got pepper sprayed, and he was sort of interpreting what they were doing while they were doing it, and it was once again excessive force. What I'm trying to say is, are we not allowed to interpret the law? And that's where we come back to mutual tolerance. So when we talk about, and this to me is the solution to the whole thing, when you talk about mutual tolerance, it's basically where, let's take this George Floyd case, where George Floyd will say, look, I don't want to be arrested. I don't want to get into this vehicle. I don't want to be in the situation, but I am. And so I'm going to cooperate a little bit more than I actually want to, right? And then the same from Derek Chauvin's perspective. This guy's not cooperating. I want to take excessive control here. I want to do whatever. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give the guy a little bit of leeway, right? And that's what I mean by mutual tolerance. And I think we need the same mutual tolerance not only in those situations, but also societally. Do you think that's naive? Do you think it's a naive thing to sort of talk about? Did anyone watch the trial? Okay. I think I'm going to cut this short. I see there's some people taking pot shots at one another. That's not really what this is for, but yeah, I think that's about it. I just want to finish by saying I'm going to be doing a live on Sunday. The reason I'm doing it a bit earlier is because the sun's still up, and I don't really want to do it indoors. So I'll be doing the next live on the 96 Everest disaster. I'm going to explain that to you guys. I'm going to explain what that's all about. I don't know if you guys know, there was also a K2 disaster, I think in 2008, about, what's it, for 12 years afterwards, somewhere around there. So I've written 3 books on the Everest disaster. I'm going to take you fairly briefly through what happened with the Everest disaster, talk about the people's names and what happened. And I'm going to try and do everything in about, say, 20 minutes or so. And if you want to know where this broadcast is going to take place, it's going to be on, well, you can see in the last 3 or 4 images on my Instagram page. That's where I'm going to be doing it from. So you can check that out. So that's actually going to be quite exciting, a very scenic background there. Just for those who are unfamiliar with Patreon, I've been loading up the Craven Silence 2 audiobook and, just narrating my own chapters. It really is interesting, the insights that have come up that I've even forgotten about. The slips made during the interrogations with the cops that the Ramseys made. And so what's really interesting with that is, it takes so long to read through all of those, depositions because they go on and on and on. But I've obviously done that, and I've kind of cherry picked the little pieces that really stood out. And so you can pick that up in the Craven Silence 2. That's an audiobook I'm narrating at the moment on Patreon. So head on to Patreon/TCRS for that. Crystalina Bacteria, thanks for being here. I appreciate you thanking me for the discussion. It's a little bit where angels fear to tread, but I think, as I say, if you part of the true crime community, you've got to, in terms of creators, I think it's quite important that you've got to take a position and you've got to show some leadership in terms of your community. And I do think, coming from South Africa, I bring a different viewpoint. The other things I wanted to say, but I just I might do it at a later stage. Okay, so guys, thanks a lot for being here, and I will see you guys again on Sunday, almost the same time, but a slightly different place. So I'll see you guys next time. Thank you to everyone who's donated here, and thank you for your comments. So I'll see you guys next time. Ciao.